Hypothesis. Okay, so there's some core issues to look at in hypothesis as you roll through this week. What are you looking at? How? Why? So hypothesis is about, it's a hypothesis. It's a statement about what you want to study. You've all done a thesis. And a thesis is that looking at your paper. Your thesis is your topic, sort of thesis topic, if you want it, your idea. So I want you to consider looking deeper at where does it come from. So where does it come from? The thesis is an idea. The hypothesis, if you want, hypothesis, hypothesis. It's a very focused statement. Your thesis idea, where does it come from? Comes from, is the broad sense of what we're interested in. The hypothesis is the statement that you're going to test experimental design. You're going to test and show that it's correct. Here's what I believe, and I'm going to show it's correct. Done. So what are you going to research? How are you going to research? I suggest pick a topic you like. If it's a topic you think that would be easy to do, good for you. You might find suddenly it's not, because you're doing a lot of reading you were not ready for. So pick one you like. It's easy to go back in and do the research. Now, throughout the course, you're going to see these squares on the PowerPoints, either here or across the bottom. If you see them in that box on the side, you need to recognize those as important terms you need to know. Not, and I'd go beyond memorizing, understand them. Put them into simple terms for yourself. The grounded theory is curiosity. That's my word for it. No preconceived idea. Curiosity. Ethnography, I would say empathy is the one word I'd replace it with. It's not quite the same, but it's close. So ethnography gets us looking at standing in their shoes. Empathy, understand what people think, feel, exist in, what's their world look like from their perspective. Phenomenology, I say belief is the word I say to remember what that one's about. What's the overarching idea, the thing, the concept that connects with people, that grafts them together, that accounts for this social environment, the way people interact. How was it constructed? How was it built to be? That's those theories that we touched on in the last unit, in the beginning, the intro, but it's that they underlie the whole of the course. They underlie all of what you do when you think research. So what are you going to research? How does it fit into those? That becomes second step, the method. Where does the idea come from? If you do, and that's important. I remember a woman that I did research with, she, well, at the same time anyways, we were in the program together. She did nursing. She was an obstetrics nurse. She became a doula, but she became interested how that came about, that shift from nursing to doula to doing research on comparison of the two. It was brilliant to listen to her. She was doing something her heart was in. It was easy. My research was easy to do, big stack of books, easy to do because I could go read another one because, wow, this is interesting to me. If you pick it because you think it'll be an easily available topic, you might find that when you got to go do those readings, a book, a chapter, an article, you're just not really into it because it's just kind of work to you as opposed to something that's an interest. So that's important. Where does the idea come from? If you're committed to something, you do research because somebody in your family has an ailment. Many people in medical research, maybe they've got to know it somehow. What took them to that particular interest in a topic? A friend that did his research and is now turned into a major research project in the East Coast is diabetes and sunlight and the impact of sunlight, vitamin D on diabetes, but it's the natural vitamin D, not the pill that you're taking. So it's turned into a significant research project. He is diabetic, makes sense. And he knows many people who are. So the other one you think about throughout your research is who might be affected. So if you're thinking about that and it's who might be affected long run, it's not immediate. It could be somebody a little bit spaced, a little bit of distance. How do they fit in? What's the possibility that you're going to identify somebody, cause them some grief? Maybe not this person. If you study children and you cause some emotional trauma to a child, how about the radiating effect of that on other children, on the family, perhaps on their next generation? You've got to consider how that fits in. So as we think research, there's a couple of things to consider. There's collaborators and resources. Collaborator, somebody you work with. You engage, group work, and everybody joins in. Resource, we're working in a group. You do all the work. I show up and say, oh, what do you want me to say in class? I don't do any work. I just make use of you to help me. You're my car ride to work. We're friends because you have a car, I have a car. And we become friends. We're on social media together. We're talking, we're visiting, we spend time to and from school, all because of the car ride. Your car breaks down. We're not riding together. Next thing you know, you've removed me from your social media. You're not stopping and visiting the same. You say hi, you keep going. I was never your friend. I was your resource. So we're all familiar with social settings, and we think about it. Often the language of that is being used by someone else, knowing friends it's happened to. That is, in our world, in the research world, we'd call that being used as a resource, not a collaborator. You didn't join with them. You borrowed their time. You took from them something, but it wasn't shared. That's a big deal. The other thing is we move in, we're not going to touch null hypothesis first. We'll do a hypothesis and then come back to null hypothesis. In the hypothesis setting, we're going to do the assisted death and AIDS patients issue. So there's my issue first, and then it's going to come up. You're going to see that in the book by now. Independent variable, dependent variable, intervening variables. That's language you should get used to. I'm just going to give you a little idea what that means.
Dependent variable, dependent on. Adult parents are independent. Children are dependent on the adult until they grow up. So think about it as the dependent is the big thing, the big, the tree, right? It's that big rooted thing that we hang on to that says like it doesn't move. It's the standard. The independent one is the thing you measure and say, if I change the dependent, does it change if I change the independent variable, does it change the dependent? If I change the parents, does it change the children? If I change independent, so think about it this way. I want you to think about, so big tree, right? Dependent, if I go up here with a saw, I get up in the tree. And I hack off the limbs. It's not a tree the same anymore. There's no branches over there. So it's less of a tree. If I hack off enough of these branches, the tree's still here, but all of the smaller branches that stem off of it are gone. Hopefully that's a good way to get in mind the idea of dependent, independent. The branches that grow off of that tree, they become something other than the original. Doesn't move. That big thing, this big piece doesn't move, whatever we do. But the small ones, they're changeable. If I pour gasoline under that tree, change the tree, the branches, the leaves will die, the branches will die. Taking this and looking and saying, oh, do these branches all over the ground, do they relate to this tree? Are they just branches on the ground? Were they a different tree that was taken down? Or are they part of this one? So you'd look at them and say, wow, look at that. They seem to be connected. What are they connected? Oh, look here's the little branch. They've been hacked off. Does that particular tree branch there align with this branch? Are they connected? Or is there something interfering? There's other ones over here. Which one is it? Does this branch, this dependent variable, and a variable is just something that could change. It could be viewed or categorized a different way. So does this one and this one and this one, are they from the same thing? Are they disconnected? Is this the dependent variable? the thing that came from that spot there. Tree branches are they fall from, they grow on, they're changed all because of, and it's all about that tree. So the intervening variables that determine, is this particular branch part of that tree? Yeah, the intervening variable is, you would cut. How would you measure it? You'd measure the cut. You'd measure the cut up there. You look and see, see the little lines? Do they connect? Line up with the ones up there? That's where you would say, okay, these lines line up. The cut is right. This is connected to that. That tree caused that branch, and the branch is now taken down. So it's harder to read. The fact that it's off the tree makes it an intervening variable. The removal of it, the act of removing it, makes it intervening. The act of that it's maybe sat on the ground for a while, intervening. That there are several there to pick from. Which one is it? Intervening. Intervening is that thing that makes it hard to determine whether this thing is connected to that thing, whether this action. So I've done this in a hard thing, an object. We would do the same maybe with people. We'd look and say, what's the action that somebody does, and does it actually cause the secondary action? The first action that I wonder if it causes the other. So there's the Kim's convenience stuff, looking at causality. If you're looking at causality, I say, what I'm going to cause myself to get across from one place to another. I'm going to move across a pond. How am I going to get there? I'm going to cause it. How did that work out? Who was involved? Was there one player? It's a boat, a little canoe thing, or a kayak or something. One person? Is it a two-person? Did you need paddles? There's no paddle. How did that work out? No, they couldn't have made it. Well, they did. Did they make it? Yeah, maybe there was the shovel. Oh, maybe the shovel was the thing they used to cause them to be able to get from one side to the other. Maybe it's just hands. We would say, what did they do that allowed it to work? So any social research you look at is that kind of looking at, just like this very physical thing, is looking and saying, can we show a relationship between this activity and that activity, this activity and that event, this event, that event? Are they related? Are they completely independent? They may seem to run along, and you get that in the stats thing. They may seem like they run in line together, correlated in time, but not actually caused one from the other, not actually a part of. So you look here and you say, so I say something like that. You might look and say, oh, boat, shovel, water, path from the other side. How did that connect? Are they connected? Are they not? Well, you'd look and say maybe yes, maybe no. With a little more data, we might start to be able, and data is the word, information data. We might start to be able to put them together and say, come up with a hypothesis and say, there's no way into this place except by boat. The boat is here. We've looked around. There is no paddles. There is only a shovel. And if we actually did some research, so we paddled across the lake somehow, and we found that there's an entrance, maybe across this little bay or something. There's some way that's the only way into the area. Well, okay, clearly they had to have come this way. What was used? What were the tools? What were the implements that helped them to get here? So you might start to say, draw conclusions, findings. Now, a conclusion, a finding is what I think makes sense from my research. It doesn't mean that I'm right. I'm going to present it as I'm right. All of academia is presenting that I'm right. I may, though, if I'm good at this, present the possibilities of error. So we're going to look now at a particular thesis, a thesis statement. Thesis statement is this. Here we are here, assisted death and people suffering with AIDS. So that's my issue. Maybe I know somebody close. I work at a hospice, or I know someone. This is a particularly unpleasant way to die. Cancer could be similar. These are hard hard social spaces to be in. They're hard for the patient. They're also hard for the people around it. So consider this. And this is the hard part of the hypothesis. The lab, I said, spend 20 minutes thinking about it and spend 2 minutes writing it. So my issue is someone with AIDS suffering, someone I know, so it matters to me, and assisted death, because my friend, my brother, my partner, my parent, whoever it is that my child is saying, I want euthanasia. I want out. Now, consider, here's where we are. Perhaps the government has asked us to do some research on this, on euthanasia. So euthanasia in Canada. In Ontario, it's allowed. It's not allowed like the set of rules. We were very cautious when we did it. But the idea of euthanasia is we're taking a life. We don't do capital punishment because it's inappropriate for the state to take a life. If we say murder is wrong, the murder is wrong, whether it's an individual or the state. Murder is the taking of a life. Assisted death would be the taking of a life. But what we've got in this quandary here is the government has said euthanasia is okay. So they didn't say it's okay to kill. They say we won't lay charges. The state will not come after you for assisting someone if it speeds it up. And then they set in some rules to go with it that say, and this is where it really hasn't changed much in some ways, because you need someone to sign off. You need to find a doctor who will say, yes, the person is suffering that bad. There's nothing else we can do treatment wise. And this is the key in it. And they're that near to death that we're helping a little. Those are hard conditions to meet. So euthanasia is it's not happening a lot in Canada. There was a concern that it might get overused. But so consider this, and here's where your hypothesis. So let's consider the government comes to us and says, we asks us as a class to say, as a class, please do the research for us on this. What should we do with this model? Is it working? Should we undo it? Should we increase it? Should we change the standards? So depending on our hypothesis, the simplicity of a couple of words, so we think, well, yeah. So from my point of view, I'm positive. I'm sort of supportive of it, and I would say, okay, well, people with AIDS suffering with AIDS should have assisted death. It's sort of a broad, simple, like a statement. Well, they should have, or they should be entitled to. And think about the difference in those two words. If you say should have, you may end up with a different sense. Think about this. Should have. What does that mean? Ooh, that's terrible writing. They should have. Now that could be interpreted as they should be sent. It should happen. That could turn into, as a state, we don't want to have to worry about their concerns. Now, if we make it should be entitled, AIDS patients are entitled or should be entitled. Should be entitled. That's a very different statement. In the should have, there's room for, now you've got some bias. We talked about bias in the last class. You've got some bias could push into this. Maybe you could have somebody doing research who has an issue with AIDS, have some issue about that AIDS is a sexually transmitted disease, so there could be some penance or punishment thing tied to it. There's a lot of room for difficulty in the should have, because that's what the state ought to do, as opposed to should be entitled to. Now our research project, when we go with the second one, we go with this. What we're looking at is a project that is looking at the liberty, the right of the individual. And that fits more with Canada. As we stand right now, that's who we are. So we should be doing our research from the point of view of people suffering with AIDS should be entitled to assisted death. That, I think, would be the appropriate hypothesis. So there's the 20 minutes of thinking, dissecting your words to make sure you don't put in words that may lead your project into somewhere you didn't want to go. You don't want to be thinking, doing research on they should have. The idea when I first say it is very loose language, it's conversation language, but when you're doing research, a hypothesis, you can't afford that loose language. You've got to be very clear. So things we would consider in doing that research, and here's where we get to the method, is the method gets at where do we gather our data? And this is what the course is all about, gathering your data. So you want the patient view. How do we find out what the patients think? We ask them. Now the question becomes, how do we ask them? And that's the methodology. In the methodology, who should we get information from? How many? Where are they? That'll come up in sampling. And then how do we gather it? Do we send them a survey and say, sorry for your luck to every hospice or every, palliative care and just surveys? It's too personal. So that's a bad method. We might get lots of data, but I'm going to suggest from my point of view, my ethical standpoint, I would say this is bad methodology. It just is too crass. It's just disregards the significance of it. So it seems to me to get the patient information, I'm going to have to go do the interviews with those patients. Now, I might be okay for that, but how about I get some research assistance? Are they prepared for the emotions that may come out of doing those interviews? Because it could become very emotional very fast. So the idea of suffering through it, the idea of sitting and talking to people who are in really bad physical condition, who are emotionally troubled, that can be a lot of bearance on a person who's doing the interviewing as well. Now, who else might tell us about the patient view? Family? Family might tell us. So I'm not asking at the family view. We're just looking at the patient view. What's the patient position? Okay, not family yet. We're just doing the patient. So the patient, we want to find out what the patient thinks. Maybe the family could help us. Could the family be biased? I say yes, they could, very much. If this was me, if I was in this particular position, I would say, let me go. That would be my choice. But my mother is quite religious. And in her view, she would say, euthanasia, if you choose to go, she may well connect that with suicide, and she may well connect that with my soul burns in hell. So in her mind, she's going to tell you, no, my son would want that, because she can't live with the responsibility, the thought of not bearing the responsibility of speaking against it to save me from myself. Parents do it all the time when the children get hurt, that you catch them, you stop them, you prevent them from hurting themselves. It may be the same mindset here, where it's about my immortal soul. So the family might be able to tell you what I think, but you have to be conscious of connections and links with the family that might be an indicator of, that might be biased and might show that bias. So be conscious of the limits or the caution using family. You do gather data from them. Perhaps the nursing staff there. If you're in a hospice, you'd have nurses, you'd have doctors, The doctors could give you some insight, but again, it's how much weight you put to the doctor. How about the cleaner? You've got RNAs now, registered nursing assistants, who assist. They're in close with people. Certainly in palliative care, they spend significant time. The cleaner, and the cleaner will come up later. The cleaner will come up later in the course with Goffman. The value of that place. It's a dismissed social status. That person has little or no social status. They come in and out of the room. They just get used to them coming and going. And those, because everybody has ignored them because of their status, those people may see an awful lot that you have no idea what's going on. They do, because they see it all. Something to consider. Let's go to the family view. Who could tell you what the family think? Well, the family certainly. Would you do interviews if you wanted to reach out across the country? A lot of people. Are interviews appropriate? Can you afford to do interviews? How many can you do? Maybe here you might be able to move to a little more questionnaire interview. So it's a more in-depth sense of questions. It's not quite just a survey, but it'll give you a little more sense. It allows them more time, a little more depth, but you would gather more data than you could with an interview. That might work. So the family can tell you what they think. Again, the doctors, the nurses, the staff, and including the cleaner, because they're going to hear the conversations families are having about do they, don't they, what are their thinking, what's their concerns with whether they agree, whether they say to the doctor, please do, please don't. They're going to have access to it all. On the other side, the society view. The patient as well may be able to tell you what family thinks as well. The patient might be a source of data for what the family's view is. Now, remember, we got asked by the government to do this. So we're looking at a social view. We want to get that up close stuff, the ethnography. We want to talk to the patients. We want to talk to the family. We want to get that ethnographic information, in-depth, close, personal. But at the same time, we need to get what society thinks, because we're looking at legislation. Should they change the law? So the society view, perhaps a survey would work. In this, a survey could be sent out. Some thoughts for people and then some questions. Perhaps a referendum sort of thing. That's a referendum is a really short and quick survey. Yes, no, support it, don't support it. So that might get more, and a phenomenological viewpoint might be more meaningful in this, because you're looking to say what's the core belief, what should happen or not happen based on that core belief. That's where, so how we gather data, these are our sources of data, and how we gather that data becomes key to us. So let's look on. So there's our hypothesis. Should it be allowed is the question. And we say they should be entitled to, and we do the research to prove it. Now, the null is a different thing altogether. The null hypothesis is a different kind of thinking. I can't prove it directly, perhaps. So I'm going to try and prove something. I'll prove the opposite. I think about the opposite. I prove that the opposite is false. And if it's false, therefore I can make the conclusion that this must be the case. Now, I want you to think about this. The world is round, right? It's a big round world. We know that. They didn't always know that. So in that big round world, before, when we used to think the world was flat, and of course everybody knew the world was flat. If you said it's round, you're crazy. Now consider this. Consider politics. I'm going to come from a social political place because that's my background, but science might be this. They didn't know anybody who's seen an atom, and I don't mean the guy. Anybody seen a small, we've never seen them, but we believe they're there. We all know and believe that we're made of atoms and protons and neutrons, right? Positive and negatively charged ions. And now they've got smaller things, nanotechnology they're talking about. Stephen Hawkins came up with the idea of something smaller, the whole sense of what we're looking at in physics is the possibility of something even smaller that makes sense of atoms in a way that we can't see it, but it's called that idea of nanotechnology, the idea of something that much smaller than atoms. So, and if you read his stuff, it's quite interesting. That's what he's getting at, is prove something. The atom's not the smallest molecule. They're smaller ones. They're different. So, but we can't see it. So when they came up with what an atom is, it's because there was this idea of, let's prove that this is all we have. This makes sense. And they said, no, this doesn't work. So there must be something else. So they make a statement to try and prove that it's correct, that what we can see, feel, touch with our eyes, smell, that's as far as it goes. That is proven to be false, and therefore there must be something different, the contrary. So our statement that says this world we can see, feel, touch, smell is null, is a null statement, because I'm going to try and prove that it's incorrect. And a big part of the difference between hypothesis and null hypothesis is I'm going to try to prove that it's false in the null. In the hypothesis, I'm going to prove it's correct. So in that, we found out there must be something, and that starts a new hypothesis. What could it be? They get curious, the kind of curiosity, and go with, and they come up with the idea there for a second. Aristotle did just this. Aristotle was very much about the perceptible world. So Greek philosophy, theory, and then it would have been called science. Remember that reality, scientific research? Aristotle very much did scientific research. And he said, what makes a boulder roll? What causes some? Aristotle got us to look at, in his research, got people to look at something quite different. And he said, what are we doing here? What is this? The world is real, and we can feel it, we can smell it, we can taste it. But Plato got him on this idea because Aristotle's a student of Plato. And feel it, hear it, well, not the chair, but birds or whatever. So he says, this is a chair. Here's our little chair here. And he says, this is it. That's what a chair looks like. Right? So this is a stool. It's for sitting on. We call this one a stool. And I can sit on my little stool here. Right? And I'm sitting on my little stool. It says, oh, here we go. Perfect, the chair. Plato gets us on this path of saying, somewhere, this is one form of chair to sit on, but then there's a chair with a big back. There's the lawn chair. There's the soft chairs in the classes that you've sat on, right? That you wheels on them, they're more comfortable. Then there's the hard metal ones that you can stack 800 of them in a room in a small space. So they're very efficient, but they're not very comfortable after a couple of hours, right? Everything falls asleep. So the chair is an interesting place. Plato gets thinking about it, says, you know, in order for there are all these different kinds of chairs, and they're all good chairs. So if they're all so good, then there must be a concept chair that is beyond us. We can't see it, we can't feel it, we can't know it other than conceptually. We can grasp the idea of a chair. And I grasp it one way, and I make my pretty little stool here that I can sit on. You grasp it another way and make the big soft one. They're all different forms of chair. And in those different forms of chair, he says, these are the perceptible form of chair, but there must be a form, chairness, the concept, a big thing out there that's beyond us all, that once in a while we tap into. And I tap in one way. That's how I can build a chair that's good. It's not the perfect chair. It's an imperfect chair. It works. It's satisfactory. It's good enough. But it's an imperfect chair. It doesn't match the perfect that's conceptually out there around me. So I'm going to sort of do sky because the sky's the big round thing around us. But so Plato does that. And Aristotle comes along a little while later. Aristotle's very interesting because he takes the same notion and by scientific research shows that in order for something to start needs motion. And he does this whole thing on motion, very much the science stuff. Aristotle's this wonderful piece of law is built on causality. Now, if you've watched the Kim's video on causality, what makes good art? Aristotle started with what makes things move. What makes this boulder go down the hill? Well, we got all these things sitting here on the edge of the rock, right? And they're just sitting there. Oh, where's my button? There we go. So they're just sitting still there. And he says, what makes this move? Well, something needs to do it. Something needs to come along and push this. It could be tipping right on the edge. And it could hang there tipping forever. But if something comes along and pushes it, you need wind or a being, and off it goes. And he says, so you need that energy to start it up. The motion that pushed this thing off the edge is because energy made it happen. Something made it go. There has to be something that makes the thing move. And he works his way through this causality and says, how did it come? How about, do you remember the little song? Anybody remember the song when you were a kid? Roll over, right? What was it? And they all rolled over and one fell out. So it's that notion of, why does this one roll over? Because the one beside him bumped him. Well, why did that one beside him bump him? Because he rolled over. And that goes on forever. He says at some point there has to be a start. It isn't going on perpetually. We see rocks sitting, huge rocks, boulders sitting on the side of a mountain, and they don't go down. He said, something has to happen to make them move. They will move eventually, maybe, but they need something to do. He says, so now this is where the Greeks are into headspace. But this is that same scientific approach. This is the same null hypothesis approach that went with the atom. It's the same null hypothesis approach that went with potentially with, depending on how I write, I don't need to write negative language, anything that's a null hypothesis, something I can't know. He says there must be something greater than everything that starts it all. It has to be at the beginning. It's in perpetual possibility. And that perpetual possibility must not move because it caused everything else to move. But if it moved, it wouldn't be there anymore. So it must remain. So it's an unmoved mover. So for the Greeks, thought was what it was all about, concept. So for the Greeks, it becomes, for Aristotle, becomes thinking is the activity. The thing that it does is thinking. The thing that it is thinking. Thinking like our mind works, but way bigger than our mind, back to Plato's chairs. Way bigger. So thinking is there all the time. It exists always. It's in perpetual motion because it's perpetually thinking, but it never stops and it never moves because it's only thinking, it's thinking about itself. It's that concept, and you don't need to know all this, but it's that idea of Aristotle, 2,500 something years ago, came up with this notion of an unmoved mover. Now, remember I said, I think last week I talked about the God-science debate? Aristotle's proof of the unmoved mover, now he thought of it as concept and thinking, the Catholic Church a few hundred years later accept as proof of the existence of God. And that theory, back to remember the method, I said if the method is sound, then it's an argument about findings. Aristotle, a scientist doing scientific method research, comes up with proof of the unmoved mover. The Catholic Church later adopts as proof of the existence of God, and it still holds. It has not been undone. Now, that proof of the existence of God is some you can argue against it, argue for it. The findings or the outcome is arguable. They're difference of opinion. The method is sound, though, and that's why it still holds. Just like the Big Bang Theory, that method is sound. So consider that as you consider what is the null hypothesis. The null hypothesis, why? Then we get to this place of what are we doing? Who's going to be affected, which I'd already asked. Milgram gets us to that. And we ask, what's the impact? Where did it come from? HIV. Well, back to HIV. The medical model. They do experimental research, experimental design. The medical models show up and they come into a place. So it is to set up a control sample. So you've got 3 parts. You've got a group that is treated. So let's look at anything you want to look at, whether it's looking at people or things. We had an HIV crisis decades ago, and in that crisis, that idea of a crisis, the medical community decided we need to go do some research and find out how to do this. What's going to work? What will be a medication, pharmaceutical that we might be able to come up with to help either? And that's what their coronaviruses. They're doing that with anything that's a virus. The flu virus they do it with. They meet once a year in Atlanta, I think and they come up with the viruses that are 5 most likely viruses, and they've been doing this for decades. What are the 5? It used to be the 3 most likely viruses to spread. Then it became the 5 most likely. So when you go for a flu shot in the winter, they give you an injection of that flu, like it's dead, but they give you an injection so your body can build up immunity to that virus. Well, COVID-19, they missed that one. So, and it's the pandemic that they've been trying to work to prevent for years. So in that, they needed some people to try it. So with medications around HIV. So you go to a village. Now here's thinking about it. It seems practical to go to a place where there's a lot of prevalence. If you go there, you're going to see there are lots of people. So then you go and you ask, who will join in our research? Well, there may be a lot of people willing to sign up, but why? If they're maybe expectant mothers, they're thinking about their child, they're willing to sign up because they're hoping if this works, my child won't be born with HIV. Now, HIV is a very different situation than it used to be. It was, I know when it started, there was a social concept that it was a death sentence. Not so much. Lots of people live for full long lives with HIV, as with many other physical ailments. So or difficulties. What you get with it though is, might people sign up because there's some other thing that the risks are overlooked because there's some other emotional issue for me that matters, that I'm going to overlook the risk. Now it's about risk taking, and everybody takes that risk, but who takes the risk for whom and how and why? So in that model, what they got was, you take a section of the community. So if we look at here, you would come to so here's back to the medical model. Let's have a look. Little example for you. So the medical model comes into a village. Big, giant problem in the middle of it. And they come in, and you've got all of the people in the village. So most in the village have got HIV. And we want to test it. So there's a few that do, right? So young people do, and you've got some other older people do. And they say, we need to test this and find out, because we think we have a cure. We have an inoculation that will work. Again, that's in every virus scenario, that's what they do. So they do the research. They've done the research and found out that it works on mice, it works on rats, maybe it works on goats and pigs. So they come into the community and they say, we need to figure out if it does. So we need the group that are left alone. They're all up here. We're going to leave you here. All of the people that don't have it, carry on. Life just stays normal. Then we get the people that we're going to take half of this group. These are the people who are willing to, then they ask, are you willing to join in research? Well, you're going to get a few people who are going to say no. So there's a couple of them. And then you say, so they're out there living with, this is all the people just living life as they always did. So what you get in this is you get some who say, we're going to give you the pill because we're certain it'll work. Take it every day at 7 a.m. And this group is given a placebo. So this group gets the treatment. They all signed up and agreed to it. Everybody said, yes, I'll join in. Everybody said it because let's assume they're all mothers who are expectant, pregnant, and they're concerned. They're thinking that if this pill works, it means my child won't get HIV. So they've all signed up thinking that they're going to find out. This group just live life. This one that's given the placebo, they're given a fake pill, a sugar pill. It's white. It looks the same, but it's not the pill. This group, the placebo group, their results at the end of the research, so they take blood samples after the research. At the end of the research, or they take blood samples from the babies, all of these people should look the same as the rest of the population. Everything stays the same. This is the control group. We know we gave them something. We know we gave them nothing, but we monitor them. We monitor them the same as the treatment group, the ones who got the pill. We monitor these two groups. We monitor, so in medical model, you would monitor blood, COVID, you're going to model the nose, the blood conditions. Monitor them both. This one got treatment, this one didn't. And we should see this one remains the same as the general population. And this one we will see because it's an experiment. It's a hypothesis that this particular medication will prevent the spread. So we will see when we're done that these people none of them are spreading it to anybody else because it worked. That's the medical model. Now it's interesting because if this is about some virus and it works, so all of these people, none of their children are born with HIV, so it worked for this group. And then you get one out of here whose child is born without it, and they don't. Our medical model can't explain that. We will call it an anomaly. We didn't cause it, so we can't explain it. Now, what's interesting is our medical model is only about 150 years old. The medical model in some of our old cultures are 4,000 years old. They've got a whole different view of medicine than we do. Some of that homeopathy stuff that is interesting is starting to come to more fruition in Canada to be accepted because we can't explain the one who didn't get the treatment and yet their results were the same as the group who did. So the medical model thing, experimental design, you're going to look at the Milgram experiment, and Milgram very much gets us to see that. Milgram gets us to see what is, when we have these people do this, what do they do? How many push the button? Milgram's is the electric shock research. Nobody gets a shock in the Milgram experiment, but it's the idea of would you push the button that shocks another person, gives them a large electrical voltage sting and potentially death. So we're going to look at it. You'll see it in the ethics model, the longer one. And then the short one I've got you to look at is just the first two, 1.5. It's about 6 minutes worth of it being redone in 2009, which you have to ask yourself, how does that work? Anyways, I will come back to that in time. For now, I want you to go back to, let's have a look here, because here's what the course you're going to do through the course. You would look at what are the different potential methods for gathering data. So here, with the HIV or the AIDS and assisted death research project, I would ask, do I do survey? Yes, the survey is a good method, a good way of gathering data from a large population for when I want to get what does the public think. I might use written questionnaire style. I might use telephone interviews. I might do actual interviews up close with people to get close to patients and families, understand how they feel. Participant observation, case study. These are all methods we're going to go through in the course. One at a time. Each week is a separate module, and they'll start to hopefully make some sense. What is your data source? That's your question. And why is that an appropriate data source? That's what you're going to get to when you come to sampling. And then we're going to look at who's the risk, which I've already asked you about. But these are huge. These are very, very significant questions. What are the possible risks and who incurs that risk? In the medical model and where I'd said medications around HIV treatment, the people that take the risk is there a social risk to what you're going to have them do, but then there's the physical risk of what comes out of the medications you thought were good for one thing and in fact cause another problem. Thalidomide in the 50s was a significant pharmaceutical drug for and it was for morning sickness, and they realized later that it had significant impact on the fetus, physical impact on the fetus. So in that you get now difficulties for people that nobody foresaw that risk. We're getting better at assessing that, and in social scenarios we have to be very, very thoughtful of it. Informed consent becomes a big deal. Deception, never okay in research. Well, sort of. That's where Milgram ran into trouble. Milgram teaches us that you need to actually have informed consent. Milgram's people knew what they were looking at, knew that they were going to press a button. They thought they were part of a research project. He lied to them. He said that we're looking to see how people learn. Will you join us and help us in that? In fact, the people he asked to join were the research subject, and they didn't realize they were the research subject. So after Milgram, we start realizing the requirement for consent, and informed consent means you tell them what they're doing. But we're going to get to Zimbardo in a couple of weeks. And when you get to Zimbardo, you say, ooh, they were all consented. And that's the Stanford prison experiment. They were informed. They knew what they were doing. But we needed to do a little more than just get consent. So deception is seen as a problem, and their participant observations are typically seen as a problem because of deception. But sometimes it's allowed to work it. Confidentiality. This is a big deal. Confidentiality, and you need to know the Wigmore test. If there's consequences to an individual for the greater good, then it's okay to breach confidentiality. But for the most part, if you promise someone you will promise them confidentiality, that means not that you won't just hide their name. It's not just about hiding their name. You will not say anything that exposes who they are. That will come up in survey week when you look at the way questions are asked and demographics. If we did a research project in the room on what we think of, let's make it the boss, the vice provost here. Everybody does a survey, I join in too. And then but they do the demographics, and they report the demographics in a typical classroom with 100 students. And they do it by age, by gender, by glasses, hair color, could be sorted out whatever way you want, but age and gender, certainly. And what you've got in the category of males over 30 is one guy who doesn't like the vice provost, and I'm it. I'm now sitting with my boss, and if that was your little research project, and so the idea of demographic research is we give we say, well, here's the categories of people, and here's what we learn from them. If you simply say you think you've satisfied with that, so the categories are by age and by gender, well, the only person in the category that's over 30 and male, crumbs. You just exposed me to my boss, who then says, next thing you know, I'm going in for a meeting to say, whoa, you there, buddy. You're that one who doesn't like me. Well, how did you know that? Because the demographics exposed it. You didn't give up my name, but because of the way the data is collected and sorted and reported, you ultimately have given up my name by accident. So if you could promise me confidentiality, that means you protect my identity. If I'm the only person in the room with purple hair, same deal. If that's the way we've been categorized, that's the way it's reported. Somebody's going to be able to figure out who I am pretty easily. You've exposed me, and you're at risk. And the Wigmore test, Supreme Court of Canada says, if you promise me confidentiality and you expose me by accident, you're responsible. So you get to pay for my new job because, while I find one, because you made some little mistake in your research reporting. So it's a big deal. It's not a minor thing. And we are coming to the end for this. Peer review. To do research, here's the other thing. Peer review is always a part of our research. So peer review will help to sort out what we're doing. And ideally, peers will help us to not make those mistakes. Funding approval means somebody gets to look at what you want to do and say yes or no based on will they give you money. And of course, there's an ethics review panel in every university and college in Canada. You want to do research, you have to go through one of those committees. So, and they don't ask about how good is your project. They ask, is there anybody